Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyekolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the post-Castro era is upon us. In a speech at the start of the Cuban Communist Party Congress on Friday, 89-year-old Raul Castro, younger brother of the late Fidel, stepped down as head of the party. The leadership has passed to Miguel Diaz Canel, who took over as the island's president in 2018. The move was expected, but it was no less historic when it arrived. Cuba has been ruled by a Castro since the Cuban Revolution of 1959. But how much will Raul Castro stepping down as party chief make a difference in the country? We'll speak with the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria in a moment. And later, remember Marcus Garvey? He was the famous Jamaican-born black nationalist who created a Back to Africa movement in the US in 1914 and became an inspirational figure for civil rights activists such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and who helped to inspire reggae artists such as Bob Marley to infuse their music with a sense of Pan-Africanism. Today, his spirit towers over the Black Lives Matter movement, especially in the wake of the death of George Floyd and many more at the hands of the American police. As the people of the black race become once again the object of renewed worldwide attention, we remember the great Marcus Garvey through the eyes of his son, Dr. Julius Garvey, who is my second guest today on the program. Coming up. And so the end of the 60-year rule of one family in Cuba. Raul Castro resigning on Friday, telling a Communist Party Congress that he is handing over the leadership to a younger generation full of what he called passion and anti-imperialist spirit. The move, which was expected but was no less historic and symbolic, ends the era of formal leadership by him and his brother Fidel Castro, which began with the revolution. For the first time since 1959, Cuba will be officially governed by someone whose surname isn't Castro. But Raul Castro did say that he would keep one foot in the stirrup, which suggests that he will remain a power broker behind the scenes.
As for me, my task as first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Cuba ends with the satisfaction of having fulfilled my duties and with confidence in the future of the country.
Raul Castro there. Well, for more on the end of the Castro era and the start of a new one in Cuba, I'm joined now in the studio by the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria, Clara Pulido. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles, for inviting me once again.
And we just heard Raul Castro there saying that he's happy that he's fulfilled what he set out to do. Would you say that he fulfilled his promises of change in Cuba that he made 10 years ago?
Well, I think that more than promises of change, he was making promises to continue developing the country. I think that, a revolution is a change by itself. And during these 6 decades, we have been all the time in revolution, meaning that it's a real combination between changes and continuity. Continuity in terms of principles, continuity in terms of social policy, continuity in terms of to try to fulfill as much as possible the needs of the people, the good people of Cuba. And change is also because we have a very important principle that we have to change whatever needs to be changed. This is an important concept for us. So, yes, I think that he has fulfilled all the promises that he could fulfill. He's not this kind of person that promised something to not work on that.
Right, but some of the things that he said he wanted to see have not happened, have they? I mean,
it is true.
Mainly in, for instance, applying the new economic guidelines. I understand he faced opposition in his own party.
Well, in the case of the new guidelines and updating of the guidelines, according to the Congress and the analysis that has been conducted in Cuba in recent years, today we can say that 1/3 of those guidelines has been fully implemented in terms of practical policy and also in terms of the necessary legal framework to implement them. A second group of 40% approximately is still ongoing. So most of the legal measures has been already taken, and also a lot of practical implementation. And still 1/3, almost around 30% remain not, there are some measures that has not already started, mainly because they need changes in the legal framework. And in Cuba we are very, very close to what our constitution says and our laws says. So it's very important to not do steps that does not match.
But what are
the legal framework?
Sure, but what are the frustrations that Cubans feel about the state of the economy? I mean, the fact that they have to queue for food items that often aren't there when they get into the shop, and the fact that they don't have freedom of speech that people in other parts of the Caribbean and the world enjoy.
Well, in the case of the things that we don't have in Cuba is true. They are a lack of some basic food, not enough for everybody, and this is why we Cubans we have to make queues in order to buy the things that we need.
And those economic frustrations are due to the strengthening of American sanctions, are they?
And I am coming to this because you need to at this moment we have to make a combination of three very, very crucial factors. The first one is really the economic blockade against Cuba. Mainly in the last 2-3 years, the blockade has been reinforced in an unbelievable way. More than 250 new measures has been taken. The hunting, even of vessels going to Cuba with oil, with medicines, with food, has been a very serious one. And so the blockade is the main obstacle for the Cuban development and for satisfying the social needs of the Cuban people. Secondly, now in the last year we have COVID-19, and of course Cuba cannot escape to the effect of COVID. Which country has not been economically affected by COVID? And the entire world has been suffering, and several countries are in recession. Cuba is not aside of that international trend. And the third point, of course, they are our own problems. We have problems still in organization, to raise, to have better production in agriculture, and to make even a better combination among scientific research and Cuban results. So this combination is, of course, conduct to the reality that we are living now. It's true that we are facing a lot of challenges, but it's true also that the blockade is the main obstacle for the development of Cuba.
And in terms of the way that the world characterizes freedom of speech in Cuba, can it be said that it is misunderstood? Because we do see many areas where people in Cuba participate and discuss and debate. So it's not that freedom of speech doesn't exist, but they could do better. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, everywhere maybe you can have a better situation in terms of how to do things.
Yeah, but we're talking about Cuba,
yeah, in the case of Cuba, I am coming to Cuba. In the case of Cuba, there is a very important combination that you have to consider. First, the type of democracy. Of course, democracy has a lot of universal values. I am not denying that point. But at the same time, which kind of democracy you want once those basic values are in charge? And for us, it's very important to have the possibility to discuss any policy that the country is implementing. And in Cuba, it's not possible to approve a policy regarding the people without the discussion with people. For instance, I can give you an example. Since this year started, we are having a very important economic changes in Cuba. We went to only one currency. We were having two currencies before. Now we have unified both currencies, and also we have come into a restructuring of the salaries and a lot of measures in general. And some of the measures, once they started, people disagree with those measures. And a national debate started. And immediately after, in the 3 months and a half that his policy has been implementing, we have been conducting even a regulation and an adjustment to that policies that were a mistake at the moment that they were being implemented.
Right.
That is an expression how possible is in Cuba to speak, to be listened, and to be part of the national decision. And this is for us very important.
Right.
And the second point is, if we talk about Cuban idiosyncrasy, there is no way that you can shut up a Cuban. When we decide to talk, we will talk.
Okay.
So maybe we inherited that from Nigerians. You know that we have a lot of Nigerian
or
blood.
maybe from Fidel Castro,
But of course,
who does a lot of talking himself, but doesn't want anybody else to talk.
No, he listens a lot also.
Yeah.
He not only speaks a lot, he also listens a lot.
Well, now that we've brought up the Castros, a personal word from you about the end of the Castro era. I mean, you've been there all these years. The revolution took place in 1959 in Havana, and that name Castro must mean a lot to you personally. So what does this moment mean to you personally?
Well, first of all, a lot of Cubans, I have a big admiration for Fidel Castro. It's a real, very passionate admiration. And we don't talk about Castro era. We talk about revolution process. And of course, Fidel Castro and his younger son Raul has been a very important part. The younger brother Raul has been a very important and fundamental part of all this process because of their own histories. That something is important to underline. We have also discussed this here before. In Cuba, nobody. We were not discussing the issue that Fidel had the right to be president, but at the moment that, because we elected him several times, but at the moment that he got sick and he realized that he couldn't continue, immediately he resigned. And that marked a point. So he was not sick and president at the same time. He resigned to all his positions, all his posts, and only kept there as like a moral of the revolution, which was very important also to have him acknowledging that process. This is a point. Secondly, in Cuba you have to talk about continuity in terms of leadership. Raul has his own personal merits. He was not in that position because he was the brother of Fidel. He got that position at the time of Sierra Maestra.
Right.
When he was one of the first, together with Che Guevara, one of the first guerrilla men to be elevated to the degree
I'll tell you
of
what, we'll
commandant.
come back to this in a moment.
Sure.
We've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria about the new era her country has entered without a member of the Castro family in power. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyekolo. My first guest today is the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria, Clara Pulido, and there's an historic change taking place in her country, Cuba. So in the circumstances, it would be prudent, wouldn't it, to take a few moments to take a closer look at Miguel Diaz Canel. He is the current president and head of state of Cuba, and he's now replaced Raul Castro as leader of the ruling Communist Party, and that's the first time a Castro hasn't been in charge there since the revolution way back in the 1950s.
Comrade Raul Castro has prepared, led and conducted his process of generational continuity with tenacity, without attachment to positions and responsibilities, with a high sense of duty and of the historic moment, with serenity, maturity, confidence, revolutionary firmness, with altruism and modesty, for his own merit, for legitimacy, and because Cuba needs him. He will be consulted on the most important strategic decisions for the destiny of the nation.
And that's the new president, head of state and head of the party in Cuba, Miguel Diaz Canel. And the Cuban ambassador to Nigeria, Clara Pulido, is still with me here in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. We'll come back to the Castros a bit, but just coming off the back of that clip, just tell us a little bit about Mr. Diaz Canel. I understand he's a career politician who's worked his way up through the ranks of the Cuban Communist Party.
Well, he's our President Miguel Diaz Canel, and now First Secretary of the Cuban Communist Party. He's an engineer by profession. He studied in one of the universities created by the revolution. He was born 1 year after the revolution. We can say that he's a genuine product of the revolution. As many of us, he could study at the university because of revolutionary process. And quite young, he also shifted into politics after being professor at the university, at his own alma mater for many years. Then he started working as a youth cadre leader. He was second secretary of the Youth League in Cuba. And after that, he was leading the party in 2 of our most important provinces. So he has experience as party leader. He has also been Minister of Higher Education. He has, and being previously a professor, of course he had also the background
Right.
to be Minister of Higher Education.
Right.
And after that, well, he became member of the State Council, Vice President, first Vice President, and finally President.
Right.
And he was also elevated to the Political Bureau. He has a career that also can be shared with several of Cubans and several of the people that are in the top leadership of Cuba today.
So a seasoned, experienced person. But what about his public persona? Because he seems rather stiff and formal and doesn't seem to have the sort of personal charisma that people like Fidel Castro have.
Well, he has his own charisma. The issue is not to compare him with Fidel Castro.
Right.
But he has his own charisma. He's a Cuban that can dance very well, can play drums.
Well, that's not charisma. Every Cuban I've met can
dance. It's part of our idiosyncrasy, I mean.
Yeah.
But what I want to say in terms of charisma, he has distinguished himself wherever he has had a responsibility,
Right.
political, or at the political level or the state level. He has always been very close to the people. He's a person that loves to listen to people, that works very closely.
Yeah, that's true,
people.
actually. I've read somewhere that he listens.
Working a lot with young people.
Yeah, he listens a lot.
As an electronic engineer also, he's quite devoted to
Right.
all the ITCs and development of the ITC. He has been a very important support to the development of new technologies in Cuba, personally.
Right. But beyond all that, I mean, clearly he has the confidence of people like Raul Castro who've passed the torch to him. But what kind of leadership do you think he'll bring? I mean, there's a lot of talk of continuity, so we shouldn't really expect anything new and dramatic.
In a revolution, you will always have continuity
Right.
and new things. That combination, we cannot jump that combination first. Secondly, he will continue working very close to the people. He's a person who constantly calls researchers and scientific people to come and discuss issues with him and with his team. He loves to work inside of a team of people. And those issues are very important. And he also used to visit factories, universities, schools, neighborhood, and people in Cuba will love that. So
yeah, but what I mean is that, for example, the Cuban economy, we talked about this earlier, is in dire straits. I mean, these days it shrank by 11% last year, and there's been a plan to transform it into a sort of market socialism. Is that his focus? And if so, how is he likely to approach it while US sanctions continue to bite?
Well, the US sanctions are there, and they has not been changed. And we have learned for 60 years how to deal with them, even if they are oppressing us a lot. In that regard, a reinforcement in the use of new technologies, in the use of the science results are very important. You are right saying that in some extent the Cuban economy is in an economic crisis. It is true. and we cannot deny it. We were discussing this before. At the same time, we are making improvement in several areas. If we talk about the situation today in COVID, we have discussed this before in this program. We are developing at the moment that we are speaking 5 vaccines in the fight against COVID-19, but it is not the only improvement that we have made regarding COVID. We have also developed at the same time recipients to transport the samples collected of
right.
Of
you mean
COVID.
You're in the process of
absolutely, yes.
Right.
We have developed our own incubators and our own fans to ventilate people. Those are a result of the Cuban science, but also of the Cuban economy. So we are facing a very serious economic situation, and at the same time to strengthen the combination between science and economy in order to improve more and more.
Right.
Just in this month of April, we are implementing several measures in the area of agriculture, and it's very important in order to increase food production.
From a political point of view, though, I mean, are we going to see a Canel be in office for the next 60 years, like we saw with the Castros? Because I know that, for example, Raul, not Fidel, attempted to introduce the institutional changes in Cuba, for instance, term limits in the presidential mandate, and the fact that he began to emphasize a more open discussion about various issues. Do you expect that to continue?
Our constitution has always responded to the historical moment. At the time being, it was more important to not put terms for the transfer of power. At the time that we are talking, we in Cuba, we discussed our constitutions in 2018 very seriously, in a very patient way, nationwide. All of us, we had the possibility to go to meetings to talk about the constitution and the kind of constitution that we wanted to have. And in that constitution, we have approved 2 elected terms of 5 years each for the max positions in the state.
I'll tell you what,
government.
We've got less than a minute before we have to end the chat. How would you sum up the end of the Castro era in Cuba?
A revolution in continuity.
Right, okay. And would you say that your support of Fidel Castro, you spoke about him eloquently a few minutes ago, and his brother Raul, was based on rationality more than emotions?
He's a very rational person, but also he inspired a lot of emotions for us because he has his own history, and he's also a hero in Cuba. So we have a lot of heroes in Cuba, not only him, and not only now, even years before. So a revolution also has a very important combination of brain and heart.
That's a very good point, and that's a very good note on which to end. Clara Pulido, Cuban ambassador to Nigeria. Always a delight to have you in the studio. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we remember Marcus Garvey, the famous Jamaican-born black nationalist, through the eyes of his son, Dr. Julius Garvey. Stay with us.